Mhm. Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Here wanted to talk a little bit about this interview with Candace Owens of the Daily Wire. Our friend Candace Owens, who we talk about on this channel, has done an interview with Top G himself, Andrew Tate, King Cobra, Andrew Tate, basically about the recent allegations uh, that he was under and he was convicted of being recently released not so long ago from the Romanian jail, and also about the YouTube video that has surfaced of a compilation of him basically saying that he admitting that he is that he was a pimp, and then juxtaposed to what he said recently on the Tucker Carlson show that he is not a pimp, that he was just having girls as you know allegedly accused of forcing girls um, to make TikTok videos. So what he goes into in the beginning as he starts to talk about his life and how he's transformed and how he's not, he doesn't say he's regretful. In fact, he says the exact opposite. He says that he's not regretful and he's not apologetic for anything that he's ever done, that he feels like a real man is not apologetic or um, regretful for anything he's ever done. And he's never actually said that he's sorry. He said that he's grown as a person and that um, he wouldn't do those things today, but he did those things in the past. And one of the things he pointed out was that he actually did worse than um, allegedly forcing girls to perform TikTok videos. That he was actually, as we know, a professional kickboxer, and he actually beat people up. And Candace goes on to say that she herself, if she'd have gone back, that she's 34 years old, and if she'd have gone back 10 years before, she would have done things that were regretful too, that she has a regretful past, and that we all have a regretful past, but we don't become apologetic about it. We don't beg others for forgiveness. We just move on, and that's it. And we move on with confidence, and we learn to grow as a person. And then she says that a lot of conservatives that follow her website and follow the Daily Wire, um, that they don't necessarily agree with his lifestyle choices. They say, why is she interviewing him? Why is she giving him a spotlight? He's not a Christian. He's not a conservative. And he goes on to say that just because he's not a quote unquote conservative, as they would traditionally define it, basically, in my own words, me paraphrasing, he goes on to say, well, the hell with them. The hell with them and their moral standards and their moral judgments. In fact, she later asked him in the interview, she says, well, if you're, because they talk about pornography and the ill effects of pornography on society. And she says, well, if you're such against pornography and you believe that pornography is the thing that is ruining society and emasculating men and making uh, men less uh, less successful in life, less virile in life, taking away the, as he phrases in the interview, the warrior instinct of men. Why did you yourself participate in this cam girl business? Why was this thing your primary uh, your primary way of making money? Doesn't don't you come off as a hypocrite when it comes to that? And he answers it. He says, you know, uh, you have people in the society that are rappers, people like Jay Z, people others, for example, that have done horrible things in the past, and just because they've done those horrible things doesn't necessarily negate the message that they are trying to do, trying to come across. And then he says, if they, the person, have ever participated or watched a pornographic scene, or even Candace brings up that her husband, George, says that he doesn't have social media because Instagram is even pornography. So Andrew agrees with that. And Andrew says, Well, if they've even watched Instagram or they've partaken in any sort of perverse activity that involves pornography, they themselves are at fault. So who are they, in other words, to point the finger at him and say, well, he's a hypocrite? Aren't they themselves hypocrites? Which is what a lot of people always say about conservatives, that conservatives always get on their soapbox. Conservatives always get on their soapbox about what people should and shouldn't do. Always pointing the finger. And the conservatives and the conservatives that are pointing the finger at him have no right to point the finger at him and say, well, he's not conservative enough because of his past. He has a past, obviously, and he admits to it. He owns up to it. Now, whether or not he's owning up to the entirety of what he's accused of, I'll get to that later because I feel like in this interview, she kind of soft shoed around it. You know what I mean? He kind of talks about it, but he kind of doesn't talk about it. He, of course, points the finger at the girl, saying that the girl, the young lady, was making up the allegations, and the FBI and other agencies have been chasing him for like 4 or 5 years, and they didn't really find anything. No evidence of human sex trafficking out of Romania or whatever. So, but that isn't necessarily true. I mean, we know, we all learned about the lover boy method from his case. What I mean? What is the lover boy method? What he would basically do, what he was basically accused of, is he would be in relationships with these girls, and they during the course of the interview they show a video of one of his ex girlfriends, saying that he didn't do this, but this is what he's accused of. He would become in intimate relationships with these girls, and then ask these girls to do the webcam business over time. Like say he was in a relationship with them for 3 months, 4 months, and this would be several different girls. And this is basically on Aiden Ross's show and other interviews, and even Fresh and Fit, I believe he did admit to doing this. But I think that um, Andrew Tate's disposition has changed. I think, them coming after him for sex crimes that he's committed years ago is unfair. I think in this interview, he shows that his message to young men is very empowering. He feels like that masculinity is under attack, that the society doesn't value um, men and masculine traits, and young men in particular, all the way that they should. And I feel like he has a positive message for young men. I feel like that the way he delivers it, the brashness with which he delivers his message, you may not like it. You know what I mean? It may not be your style. You may feel that he is misogynistic, which I feel the accusation that he is misogynistic and that he is sexist is wrong, because I've over the past 2 years since 2020 when I first came across Tate, I've become a fan of his for that specific reason, because he is so straightforward and is so real in certain cases. Is his personal life up to par? No, but you guys know me. I've always stated that if a person has something of value to say or something of value to offer, I don't get into their personal life. I focus on the part that I know, the persona that I know. Now, is the and the persona that gives me either guidance or entertainment or whatever. I said this years ago about Big Pun, is that I don't, not that I don't care that Big Pun used to abuse his wife, but it doesn't affect me because I didn't know Big Pun personally. I didn't know Michael Jackson personally, for example, and the things that he was accused of. I don't know Andrew Tate personally, but what I can say about Andrew Tate's message for young men, an empowering message for young men, because Jordan Peterson, who is another person who um, was empowering young men, and a message for young male empowerment. The same thing came out, and he said that Andrew Tate is like evil. Andrew Tate is a pimp. Andrew Tate is this and that. But I think there's some professional jealousy there when it comes to Jordan Peterson, because now people aren't listening to Jordan Peterson anymore. People are listening to Andrew Tate. And Andrew Tate brings this up in the interview, why people are listening to him and not listening to Jordan Peterson. And the reason is because Jordan Peterson's delivery is not there. Jordan Peterson's lifestyle doesn't reflect the lifestyle that a lot of young men are interested in. You see, you have to have, it's like fishing. You have to have the right kind of bait to get the audience in. And Andrew Tate, like he brings up in the interview, has the bait. He has the charisma, he has the lifestyle, going to Dubai, driving a Bugatti, you know what I'm saying? Doing this kind of extravagant stuff, basically matching the energy of like a rapper. You know what I mean? Like the old school rappers, they used to, you know, they still kind of do, but not really, because we talked about how different the video music industries are today. But back in the '90s, when I was a kid, what would attract us in music was like the Jay Z's and the different rappers talking about what they got, driving these expensive cars with lavish lifestyles, beautiful women. You know what I mean? Basically the Robin Leach style lifestyles of the rich and famous. But unlike the rappers, Andrew Tate's message is a message of self improvement. Andrew Tate's message is a message of male empowerment. Andrew Tate's message is a message of spiritual enrichment. You know what I mean? Especially now that he's committed himself to a life of discipline and a life of Islam. You know what I mean? A disciplined life in Islam. You know what I mean? And a message of growth. The fact that he could be where he was and be where he is right now, coming from the background that he's come from, and the fact that he stresses physical fitness and he stresses discipline in his social life and he stresses morality is a positive message for young men. So while the lifestyle may reel you in, the the message once you get when you're in there is a very positive and empowering message for young men that is needed in today's society. You know what I mean? Because everybody always talks about the messages and the images that are needed for young girls. And you guys know on this channel that I always talk about empowering and giving young girls the tools, young girls and young women the tools that they need in society. And I focus on the young role models for women in today's society. But you don't want to focus on young women at the negation of young men. You know what I mean? You don't want to focus on one aspect that makes the society whole and one aspect that makes the world run at the negation of the other. And at a time when, okay, now female empowerment is everywhere, right? Female empowerment is around the world now. You know what I'm saying? And not that that's a bad thing, but at the time when it was a little overdone, and men feel like, okay, well, what about my voice? A guy like Andrew Tate comes along and he becomes a voice for the voiceless. He becomes the male point of view, the male perspective from that, of that same dichotomy, of that same coin. Now, people will say automatically, well, he ripped off Kevin Samuels. Kevin Samuels was doing it first, or Jordan Peterson was doing it first, or other manosphere type uh, people. You know what I mean? And that's a fair case. But again, those guys, Kevin Samuels, Andrew Tate, they were older men. The thing that appeals to people when it comes to Tate is because one, MMA and kickboxing are super popular, which we always talk about on this channel, and that MMA and kickboxing was used as a vehicle to push forth female empowerment when it came to sports, especially when Ronda Rousey first came out in the 2000s, because it was so ubiquitous and so cool, right? So he is a kickboxer. He's a former MMA fighter. You know what I mean? So he has that aura about him, just like but he has the aura of lifestyles of the rich and famous type shit. Being like he's like a rapper, but he has a more influential message. An influential social message. So he's gonna appeal to a broader audience than people in their 50s. You know what I mean? A guy in his 50s, like Kevin, whether he was single like Kevin Samuels or he was in a long-term committed relationship with Peterson. Now, people will point out to me undoubtedly, because I do have a video in the archives on my channel about Jordan Peterson, right? And how I felt like when Jordan Peterson was going through his drug issues, I felt like that was hypocritical, because here he is talking about self-improvement, but yet he fell off his horse. Well, I'm not saying that about Andrew Tate. Well, the difference is that Andrew Tate was doing this cam business before he became really the face of male empowerment in today's society. Jordan Peterson was doing what he was doing behind closed doors, his drugs and everything that was really destructive and degenerative, after he became this advocate for male self-improvement. You know what I mean? And he went through that transformation. I think that Jordan Peterson now has moved closer to where he needs to be. But Andrew Tate, I think, is again far more charismatic, younger, and taps that younger audience. But that younger audience knows that he grew up in the hood. You know what I'm saying? So he can appeal to that demographic of men in a way that Jordan Peterson cannot. You know what I'm saying? Okay, and then he talks about Adam 22. Now, we talked about Adam 22 this channel before in the Kiki Palmer video when the video first happened. When the Kiki Palmer thing first happened, and the video of Adam 22's wife out. Now, for those that don't know, Adam 22 is a podcaster, a famous, influential podcaster about hip hop and basketball, the No Jumper podcast. He has an OnlyFans with his wife, Lana the Plug, a former. And recently, they had a video where she shot her first scene with another man, another fellow porn star, Jason Love, a BBC scene. And then subsequently, Adam 22 gave his wife, Lana the Plug, who shot this scene with another man, a Lamborghini. Now, being so this happened around the same time that Andrew Tate did the interview with Tucker Carlson, Andrew Tate brought this person up, Adam 22. And he basically said that Adam 22 is a disgusting, vile human being, and that it was part of the matrix, as Andrew put it, that the way for basically it was a way for women to assert their dominance over men, because here's Adam 22 being cucked, basically allowing his wife to have sex with another man, putting himself in a subordinate, submissive position. And Andrew was basically saying on Tucker Carlson's show that this was a way for but by society promoting this, by the internet and social media promoting this was a way for women to basically subordinate men and to screw up relationship dynamics and to undermine and undervalue marriage. And that Adam 22 and his wife, Lana the Plug, were basically used as the vehicles for this. You know what I mean? Basically a social engineering experiment. And Adam 22 heard about this, and he, of course, Adam 22 is a cloud chaser, and he got Andrew Tate on his podcast, and Lana, and here's Andrew Tate. That was Aiden Ross's podcast. Here's Aiden Ross sitting there with Andrew Tate on one side, Lana the Plug, and Adam 22 on another side, and Adam 22 basically does it again. He repeats himself, and he offers Andrew Tate the opportunity to participate in a threesome with himself and Lana the Plug to film a double penetration scene. So, and of course, Andrew Tate says no. So Candace Owens in the interview brings this up, this incident with Adam 22, and on Aiden Ross's show, and she says, "Listen, I commend you for refusing that." And they talk about Adam 22. They basically call Adam 22 a misogynist, a degenerate, and basically infer that Adam 22 was indeed offering it. And Candace Owens uses these words that he, Adam 22, has his wife as a sexual slave, offering her services to Andrew Tate and to Jason Love, which he already Jason Love already did it, but offering his wife again to another man, to Andrew Tate. You know what I mean? And basically using the example of Adam 22 to show how society has degenerated. Not only um, that they're using that the system, the matrix, if you will, is promote female supremacy over men, a gynocracy, but also to use Adam 22 to promote sexual degeneracy, and using Adam 22's example and people like Adam 22 and Destiny as examples to undermine the institution of marriage. And they talk about this. And they talk about how the influence of the trans community on pop culture, and how people feel that they have to conform to these norms, and they have to basically kowtow to people in the trans community. And this is something that Jess Hilarious, right now in her feud with T.S. Medicine, has gone through. Jess Hilarious, for those that don't know, is a social media comedian, and she basically, her incident was that she came out and she said, "Listen, trans women are not the same as real women. They don't get periods, and they don't experience the physical traumas as actual real women do." And T.S. Medicine, a trans woman, got on her for this, and some social media platforms are canceling Jess Hilarious. So Candace and Andrew Tate are absolutely right when it comes to this, that people cannot speak their minds on how they feel about how this whole thing, how it's being pushed too far. So they're right. When you have a libertine attitude, when you have a libertarian-esque attitude, you open Pandora's box to a bunch of social ills. So I can't say I disagree with them on their take on the Adam 22 thing, which is what I brought up even before Andrew Tate even said the thing about Adam 22. I said about Adam 22, I said that the whole Adam 22 shit does undermine marriage. You know what I mean? People are focusing on, oh, um, dudes are just mad because um, somebody got to smash Adam 22's wife and they didn't. It's not necessarily about that. It's that, why are you going out here promoting that this is the thing that should be done in marriages? Marriage is a sacred bond between a husband and a wife. once you have that bond and once you have that commitment, you shouldn't be promoting that people should step outside of that and have threesomes or have cuckolded sessions. You're promoting degeneracy and you're promoting evil in the society, just as um, Andrew Tate was once doing. But I think the fact that Andrew Tate is now a repentant, not repentant in the sense that he's sorry for what he did, because he did what he had to do to survive in the world that he was living in the circumstances that he was dealt. But the fact that he is unrepentant uh, porn producer makes him, puts him, and he says this in the interview, puts him in a unique position to tell people the ills of pornography and how pornography is destroying our society. And people like Adam 22 are destroying our society. And the undermining of masculinity is destroying our society. You know, the fact that not that um, transgendered people are being forced to be put into the closet, but that heteronormative cisgendered men are being forced to conform, and women being forced to conform to their particular ideology and feelings. And while I may not agree with what they're hinting at or may not agree with what they're getting at necessarily, because I feel, me personally, okay, a transgender person wants to do what a transgender person wants to do. It's not bothering me. But at the same time, when you start promoting it to little children, when you start trying to influence little children, or you start trying to promote it in the sports leagues with women in women's sports, trying to undermine the achievements that women have achieved, cisgender women, biological women have achieved, or trying to assert your place in saying that you are the same thing as a real woman, basically, then I have a problem with it, because now you're not trying to assert who you are as a person. You're trying to erase biological women, or you're trying to influence children into what is basically a sexuality, which is basically a sexual identity. You know what I'm saying? It's not that. It's not that uh, we hate who you are. It's not that we don't want who you are to exist. It's what we don't want any sexuality, basically heterosexual, homosexual, whatever, to be pushed on children. You know what I'm saying? We don't from the position that I come from and the position that Andrew Tate conveys in this interview, we don't want those opinions pushed on kids. You know what I mean? That's inappropriate. Instead of teaching them their ABCs, instead of teaching them history, instead of teaching them um, algebra, instead of teaching them science, you know, the scientific method, now you're teaching them about transgenderism and sexuality. And it seems like by doing this, they're trying to sexualize kids. And I think that's the biggest thing, besides the male identity and male empowerment. I think that's the biggest thing that Andrew Tate conveys in this interview, is that he is a crusader, even though he doesn't have children. He is a crusader for children's rights. He's a crusader for uh, so the the um, the rights of kids, not at the expense of LGBT people, not at the expense of the trans community, but for children. You know, he doesn't he doesn't want kids to be sexualized, and he doesn't come across. I don't think as you know, I know he's a Muslim. He doesn't come across as a moralist in this interview. He doesn't come across as somebody who's trying to push his religion or push his ideological beliefs on the people. In fact, he's against moralism, and he and Candace have that discussion. And eventually, she says that eventually he will come around to being a conservative. He will come around um he doesn't she doesn't say a Christian. You know what I mean? But I think that's hinted at, because let's face it, Candace Owens is, and this is one of the things that I didn't hear them really talk about his Islamic faith. I think they skipped over that. And that's one of the reasons why I tuned in, because we all know that Candace Owens and her castigating of Islam and her, and especially her boss, Ben Shapiro. I don't know, Ben didn't want to do the interview with Andrew. You know what I mean? That would have been interesting because um, uh, his Islamophobic views inspired the Christchurch shooting in 2019. Let's face it, Candace is not innocent. You know what I mean? She has promoted a lot of racist, a lot of sexist, and a lot of homophobic and transphobic things. You know what I mean? And a lot of Islamophobic things. So I thought she was going to mention his faith, especially when she was on PragerU. But even when she'd been on the Daily Wire, I thought she was going to mention his faith, and try to, I guess, convert him to Christianity. She didn't come around to saying that he would eventually embrace Christianity, but she did say that he would eventually move from libertarianism to conservatism. And I think a lot of us do. A lot of us that, like myself, that maybe in 2008, 2009, 10, we started off in the libertarian uh, train, and then we kind of moved to the conservative train inch by inch. You know what I mean? Even though, like I said, I'm completely for everybody's right to do whatever. I haven't moved in that direction, but I think as you become older, conservatism makes a lot more sense. It has a lot of order to it, a lot of things that just go together right. And I think Andrew Tate, although he doesn't have the best moral record. I'm not saying that he does. He's not an angel, and he doesn't say he's an angel in this interview either. But he is a great messenger, messenger and deliverer for this type of message of male empowerment, especially. That's the part I like of him, the male empowerment part. So many people demonize him as a sexist, as a misogynist, and because of his past, because of the things he was accused of. But I think it's not about the man, it's about the message. You know what I mean? Take a look at the message, and you'll see that the message is a positive. Even though the man doesn't necessarily always live up to the message, because like he said in the interview, a lot of times people are out here delivering all kinds of messages, and they don't live up to their own standard, but they inspire others to live up to their standard. For example, would you say that Tupac Shakur was a person who empowered women? Yes, he was. But he was also accused of what he was accused of, rape, right, in the 90s. He also had a bunch of misogynistic videos. So my point is, if you're going to castigate somebody like Andrew Tate, then you have to castigate every rapper that doesn't live up to his moral standard, or every preacher that doesn't live up to their moral standard, or every political activist on the left that tries to virtual signal and try to always be the good guy and try to always be the goody two shoe, and they don't live up to their own moral standard. So if you're going to say, oh, Andrew Tate is the bad guy and Andrew Tate is the hypocrite, what about these hypocrites that you follow? What about the Black Lives Matter people that we talked about, that Candace has uncovered in her documentary, that have embezzled thousands of dollars and made their money, made their fortunes the innocent death of a lot of these young African American men at the hands of police. You know what I mean? A lot of these injustices, they haven't cared about the injustices. They haven't cared about the families of like the Eric Garners and the Trayvon Martins and the Breonna Taylors. They just the Black Lives Matter founders, the organization, the George Soroses of the world, they just want to rake in the dough. They want to rake in the dough. So if you're going to call him a hypocrite, then you have to call these people hypocrites as well, because a lot of their rhetoric doesn't really match up to their actions either. You know what I mean? So uh, that's the case there. As far as his issues, I didn't see anything mentioned. I didn't see anything mentioned when it came to the racial issue, which was very surprising because um, that's mainly what the Daily Wire gets Candace Owens to do, is talk about racial issues, because they know that she'll go against the narrative, and she'll always side with the white supremacist. You know what I mean? And always side with the right wing when it comes to this. And I think this is where the right wing is wrong when it comes to the Black Lives Matter issue. And I talked about how I agree with the sentiment of Black Lives Matter. I may not agree with the organization Black Lives Matter, and I think she was justified in exposing them, and she did have a point when it comes to them. But I didn't see anything mentioned in this interview necessarily about the racial issue, but in the Tucker Carlson interview that he did, the one he did before this, it was mentioned. And I think that um, Andrew Tate, although he is African American, he is light skinned and he is biracial. His father was African American. I think him growing up in the UK, he doesn't have the historical perspective of um, needed to comment necessarily or satisfactory on this issue. You know what I mean? In the UK, the politics and the racial dynamics are different than in the US. You know, in the US, African Americans, black people were chattel slaves. They suffered generations of Jim Crow, all the stuff that Sergeant Willie Pete always points out, massacres in Tulsa, Oklahoma, massacres in Ocoee, Florida, massacres in Rosewood, Florida, massacres in Wilmington, South Carolina, all these massacres. Like Sergeant Willie Pete has a laundry list, denial of FHA loans, redlining, blockbusting, eminent domain, all this stuff that Sarge always goes down. And we know this to be true. We know that African Americans have suffered uniquely different than any other ethnic group in this country. You know what I mean? So, given that Andrew Tate did not grow up in the United States, grew up mainly in Britain, his perspective is different. So, I don't think that he has the clarity necessarily to comment on an issue such as this. You know what I mean? He doesn't. He can't have an accurate perspective because he's white passing, and he grew up in a different country. So he hasn't necessarily been faced with these sort of same obstacles that a person, for example, like Sergeant Willie Pete has been faced with, or somebody that is like Tariq Nasheed or an Umar Johnson. You know what I mean? He doesn't have the right necessary perspective. But of course, they're going to get him, the right wing is going to get him to agree with them because they're going to view it as another black person co-signing their view of anti-blackness. You know what I mean? They're going to say, well, Andrew Tate agrees with it, so why can't we? We talked about they use these token people of these token minority groups, like they'll use Blair White to say anything against the trans community, just because she's trans, or Dave Rubin because he's gay, or whatever. You know what I mean? Whenever they want to deflect away from the obvious oppression that they do commit against minority groups and marginalized groups, that's what they'll do. You know what I'm saying? Just to prop up the straight white male point of view. You know, but to come at Andrew Tate with these kind of questions is unfair because, again, Andrew Tate didn't grow up. He grew up in poor circumstances. He grew up as a biracial man in the UK, but he didn't grow up as a biracial man in the United States. You know what I mean? Where these issues are unique. This is the problem that a person like Tariq Nasheed, which I agree with, always has with the tethers. He calls them the tethers from that movie Us, the Lupita Nyong'o movie, Jordan Peele movie Us. the tethers are the people that are underground as opposed to the people that are above ground. And he calls, African immigrants and Caribbean uh, Americans tethers because they look like African Americans, they may even behave like African Americans, but they are not African Americans. They don't have the perspective of African Americans, the unique perspective of the people who he calls them foundational Black Americans. They don't have the same grievances because they didn't go through the same experiences. So whenever they comment on issues like police brutality, issues like racial profiling, their perspective is skewed because although they are Black, they are not the historical adversary of white supremacy and white people in America in the same way that African Americans are. So they don't really have necessarily all the facts straight, or it's not their place to comment. You know what I mean? Because they have a different historical experience. And I think that Andrew Tate fits that box. And not only does Andrew Tate fit that box, but he also fits the box of somebody like the rapper Logic, or somebody that, I mean, I don't think even before he was famous that he was gonna go through racial profiling necessarily, because I don't think any racist cop or racist person that was anti-black would consider, well, would even know unless he said something, that his dad was a black man and he is indeed half black himself. You know what I mean? So because he's white passing and because he's an immigrant, I don't think he has the necessarily perspective to comment on it. And of course, conservatives are going to say, "Oh well, what do you mean he can't comment on stuff, racial stuff because he's not Wesley Snipes, or he's not Jaimin Hansu, he's not super dark skinned, or because he's not African American." No, not that he can't comment. I think whatever comment he says, it's going to be ill informed, and obviously it was ill informed. you know, the comment he said in the Tucker Carlson interview was ill informed. And what he's basically saying the same thing that every other conservative basically says about this issue. Oh, just get over it. Stop dwelling on the past. You have no right to air your historical grievances out, which is bullshit. You know what I mean? It's complete bullshit, and you lack understanding of the historical situation that the Black community has faced in the United States, either because you've never studied it or you're just being intentionally ignorant, pandering to your audience in the same way that Candace Owens often does. You know what I mean? Like, she knowingly says things that are ignorant. So on that, I disagree with him. When it comes to race, I would never. Andrew Tate would not be the person that I would ask because of those reasons. Because he's a biracial man, white passing, and he comes from a different country. So why would I ask him that? You know what I mean? It's like why would I ask? It's like, why would I ask an American? Why would I ask an American about the issues that a Palestinian might face in Gaza? That's why I like the Ask Project, because that Corey Gill Schuster does, because yes, we can know from an outsider's perspective. I've studied the conflict for years. I have tons of books on the conflict. I can I can empathize with the Palestinians and the Arab Israelis and what they go through, and even the Jewish Israelis too, and what they go through, their historical experience. But I cannot really understand from a personal perspective what an Arab Palestinian must go through when it comes to the occupation of Gaza, because I myself am not an Arab Palestinian. I'm not an Arab Israeli. I'm not from there. I know it from an outsider's perspective. I know it from an academic perspective, but I don't know it from a personal perspective. So for me to sit there and pontificate, and for me to sit there and say that, for example, that Palestinians don't have the right to be angry, Palestinians don't have the right to be mad, or that Jewish people don't have the right to advocate for, say, Zionism. And I myself, I don't belong to any of those ethnic groups. Although I try to take all sides into account, and I try to consider all sides, which I don't think Andrew Tate is doing with the racial issue. I don't think Andrew Tate is even considering um, the case that African American advocates against police brutality that were the originators of BLM, the BLM slogan, not the BLM organization, but the BLM slogan. I don't think he's even considering their case. I can consider all cases, I can consider all sides, but I can't make definite statements and say one side is wrong and one side isn't wrong because I don't share that historical experience. Same with the transgenderism. I can't automatically say that, okay, being a that transgender should be denied their rights. I don't say that. I'm not. I mean, maybe they're saying that. You know what I mean? I didn't get that from the interview, but maybe they're saying that. Are being, some people that are associated with Andrew Tate, no cap, are really really transphobic, like super duper transphobic. Sneeko comes to mind. John Zerka comes to mind too. I'm not saying that. I don't think they were saying that in this interview. I don't think Tate was saying that. I don't think Candace Owens was saying that. But I'm saying if somebody's saying that, you can't really say that from a personal perspective because you've never gone through what trans people have gone through. You never faced their struggles. You never faced their hardships. Can you say it? Sure. We have freedom of speech. We should always have freedom of speech. We should always have the right to say what we want to say. If we stop having that right, then this stops being America. It stops being, the democracy that we purport that it is, or the republic of freedom that we purport that it is. But can you really know, like from a personal perspective, from a hands-on perspective, can you really know what they go through? No. So I think his opinion on that was ill-informed. But just like with women, they make all kinds of opinions about masculinity, but they don't know the struggles that men face each and every day. They don't know the struggles that men face when it comes to loneliness, when the struggles that men face when it comes to, uh, um, depression, when it comes to uh, self-deletion um, with men, alienation when it comes to men, anger when it comes to men. I said this like last year. I was reading the Iliad, and I was like, you know what? The character of Achilles is such a representation of the modern male situation because men do feel alienated, men do feel angry, men do feel left behind, by the masters of the system, the presidents and the politicians, like the Agamemnons, like Agamemnon in the story, who's the general of the Achaean side. Achilles is mad and doesn't want to serve in Agamemnon's army initially because he feels that he's he feels that he was slighted by Agamemnon because Agamemnon uh, took away his glory, his teammate, as they say in Greek. So, and that's a lot of it. Basically, took away Achilles' warrior spirit, and Achilles' warrior spirit was taken out on himself and others. And what destroyed Achilles was his anger. And that's what a lot of men are facing now, anger and alienation. Those are the themes of, um, of the Iliad. And that corresponds to what a lot of men are facing right now, anger and alienation. And women will sit up there and say that these feelings are not valid. But again, they haven't lived the experience. They don't have the lived experience of men. They can't speak for men. And if they do, that's really presumptuous. You know what I mean? So as far as being a male advocate and being an advocate for men, Andrew Tate is absolutely right in his advocacy for men. His views on race, I can take it or leave it. I disagree with it, with the majority of it. When it comes to that. But overall, I thought this was a good interview. Um, I like Andrew Tate. Candace Owens kind of pisses me off sometimes. I think she just says things for money sometimes, and says things for the bag. I think Andrew Tate is different. Andrew Tate is real. Andrew Tate is raw. And I don't always agree with everything he says. I think, like I said, his issues on race, bullshit. You know what I mean? He doesn't know what he's talking about. He comes from an ill-informed perspective. But his issues on gender and male-female relations, I agree with it totally. And I feel like the fact that he's giving men a voice is a beautiful thing. Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see when my next video is coming out. Love you guys.